Hello, my name is Claire Tyler, Baroness Tyler, and I chaired the House of Lords Financial Exclusion Committee in 2017. Today we've published a follow-up report that looks at the position of financial exclusion today. That means people who don't have access to basic banking and financial services that most of us take for granted, and what more needs to be done. So what did we find? Well, as in 2017, there is a significant and growing problem of financial exclusion in the UK. Indeed, the COVID crisis has actually made things worse, with more than 27 million adults, that's more than half the country, now having some characteristics of being financially vulnerable. For example, having significant debt, erratic or insecure earnings, or very low levels of savings. And over 5 million people still rely on cash to a great extent in their everyday lives, which is a lot harder to do since the pandemic began. And many shops and businesses have moved away from cash entirely. So what needs to be done? We felt strongly that banks and other financial service providers need to do more to look after their customers and prevent vulnerable people being cut adrift from financial services. That is why we are calling for a new statutory duty of care to be introduced. This should be backed by legislation and enforced by the Financial Conduct Authority. It should replace the current weaker commitment to treat customers fairly. A duty of care would help redress the major imbalance in power between banks and their customers and incentivise providers to ensure that products and services are fair by design for everyone, including the most vulnerable, and always act in their customers' best interests. On issues such as mis-selling of financial products, access to free and basic bank accounts, and free-to-use cash machines, a duty of care would ensure banks have to think about the impact of their policies on their poorest and most vulnerable customers. And this change needs to be part of a wider and comprehensive financial inclusion strategy. The government needs to grasp this issue now and set out a strategy for how it will tackle financial exclusion as we emerge from the COVID crisis. We want to see the government's financial inclusion strategy set out on paper and presented to Parliament within 12 months. To ensure proper scrutiny and parliamentary accountability. So what will happen next? We will keep an eye out for the government's response to our report, and when it arrives, I will push for a debate in the House of Lords. Financial exclusion is a serious issue which is getting worse due to COVID. It's vitally important the government takes the steps we have set out in our report as a critical part of its overall COVID recovery plan.